So the BBC sent hired taxi like black cab to pick me up on several occasions to travel to the BBC's broadcasting house in central London from Stepney in East London. So the BBC has been paying over the years millions of pounds to taxis alone. That shouldn't be how it should be. The BBC should have a more sensible way of transporting guests to the program than the way that they have been doing. As I know, not only that, once I was traveling in a black cab to be interviewed live on BBC Radio 4 PM program that airs at 5 o'clock. So it must have been between 4 and 5 when I was in the taxi. And the taxi driver volunteered an advice to me. And he said that if I needed to call somebody on the phone from his taxi, I could do that. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't going to. I didn't need to call anyone from the taxi on phone. And the trick was he was actually doing what he must have been doing for a long time, or what all the taxi drivers hired by the BBC were doing. They were offering the passengers the facility to make phone calls from the taxi. And the charge that they would make against the BBC for those calls would be many times the cost of the calls. So that is what has been going on. And here in the Mirror, the Sunday Mirror, it says the Friday before Christmas, and there is this piece about culture of fear. There is culture of fear caused by Priti Patel. That's what they're talking about. Going back to the question of the BBC hiring taxis, and the taxi drivers kind of charging program guests, or transporting program guests at costs, many times the ordinary cost of transport. And that shows the BBC's kind of obsolete, outdated, and totally irresponsible way of spending the license fee payers' money. And here is the Diana brother, the Earls, they're calling me Earl, Charles Spencer. He is about to report the BBC and Martin Bashir to the police about the forgery and lying and the cover-ups, I think. And Mark Steele has got a column which his subheading is the voice of treason. Now that is good. And he's got a few pieces of treasonous kind of And there is a piece on the scared and abandoned. Families face bankruptcy as house builder refuses to replace Grenfell-style cladding on their new homes. Now that is something that we'll be talking about a bit more of. And there is a two-page spread on the Crown, and the actress that is playing Diana, she has become such a hot fashion icon that the women are imitating everything she's wearing. And there is this column, our award-winning columnist, Saira Khan. Now, what is she talking about? She's got two pieces about race and racism. One is called Jingle Balls to the Racists, and the other one is I'm more than a Brit, proud to be Asian. Now, the reason why Sarah Khan is given a column in a Fleet Street paper is nothing to do with her being proud to be Asian. It is exactly the opposite, because the narratives that she has been supporting is the anti-Asian and especially anti-Muslim narrative. And her being carrying a Muslim name actually adds to the insult to the victims of racism, anti-Muslim racism, that she is now making a career out of. And this is a misleading headline, Jingle Balls to the Racists. It's a completely rubbishy analysis of kind of racist trolls against the Sainsbury's advertisement. She says, growing up as a British Asian was tough. Asians didn't get me. Brits didn't fully accept me. I shunned Asian clothes and my mother tongue just to try to fit in. But at 50, I am at peace. And I know that being a British Asian with both takes on life is like having a superpower. Now she's confessing. She shunned her mother tongue just to fit in. That is a confession. Now, do we need her to confess? No, not on this program, because we have been saying exactly this. Diagnosis of Fleet Street is exactly about brainwashing, stoogery, and mental slavery. Now, this is a mental slave, of course. I mean, Priti Patel is a mental slave intentionally, not unintentionally, because that's a career kind of scheme. And she keeps being photographed, or photographs keep appearing in the Fleet Street papers, or Priti Patel smiling, I mean, disproportionately, widely, than she should be while she is seen next to or near Boris Johnson, who doesn't seem to be smiling at all, most certainly not widely. And here in the Mail on Sunday, it says that Johnson is set to kill off the 10 p.m. lockdown curfew. And there is a piece on the Boris Johnson regime waging a war against the Daily Mail. Big Brother furious, government uses Twitter as propaganda tool to attack Mail's COVID analysis. Now that would be kind of a welcome item of news if that were true. Because the Daily Mail, as part of the Daily Mail group, which includes the Mail on Sunday, is part of the Fleet Street deniers that are carrying kind of cover-ups about the whole COVID thing, cover-ups and cover-ups and cover-ups. They're not telling readers, or they're not printing or publishing the actual truth about what is going on with the COVID at every stage, as we've been saying. From A to Z, they're not saying that. They're talking about headlines concerned about the dealing or not dealing or dealing with the COVID. And that is exposed in the piece on page 6 of the Mail on Sunday, where it is attacking the BBC's anti-racism and asking Johnson to cut BBC's funding. Now, what is the BBC's funding? The BBC's funding mainly comes from the license fee. It doesn't come from the government. But they are talking about too much anti-racism in the BBC. They don't call it anti-racism, they call it wokery. Woke, W-O-K-E. That's a racist denial of the word racism. And William Shawcross, the racist, who is being presented as the Queen Mother's biographer, as if he became part of the Queen Mother. That is the kind of ingratiation that they are putting in for the gullibles, so that the gullibles can treat his opinion as being that much more acceptable and authoritative because he wrote a biography of the Queen Mother. And the former Supreme Court man, Sumpton, is given a space where the headline is, "Our lives belong to us, not the state. It's morally wrong for the government, control freaks, to tell us what we can do at Christmas, but only 4 pages earlier, it says Tory MPs urge Boris to go to war on BBC and National Trust. So what is the Mail on Sunday saying? It's completely contradictory, corrupt and dishonest and racist. And they're kind of after the event, as it were, because the French manager of the English Football Club is being celebrated as having been successful. They're saying secret of Wenger's success, religion and handing out Gauloises, that cigarette, and beer in his cafe. And they've got a kind of crusading 2 pages spread on the Mail on Sunday against anti-racists. They're saying quarter of students self-censor in fear of cancel culture at Woke University. Top West End writers refuse to appear with transphobic J.K. Rowling on Graham Norton. Censored by Facebook, Oxford dons who question if face masks work. So there is a lot of racism and a lot of contradictions in the Mail on Sunday, as usual. That is what we diagnose, and that is what we are diagnosing. There is no mention of any of these contradictions or racism and idiocy in the paper reviews that are aired on the BBC News Channel. On Sundays, it has a review between 9 and 10 a.m. and on the Andrew Marr show. And there is nothing in the evening, or usual evening kind of sessions that they broadcast twice on the BBC News Channel, as the Sky News does the same type of thing. And Camilla Parker Bowles' son is given a thing saying, reopen Britain's happiness industry. And Peter Hitchens is saying something about the Greens, but we'll come to that in a little while. And what the wife of Michael Gove is saying, Sarah Vane, is that the attacks on Priti Patel for her climate of fear against the employees in the Home Office would have been different. Because if she were a Labour member, and Asian Labour member of Parliament and member of the cabinet, then the left, so says Sarah Vane, would be shouting racism. They would be saying that the legitimate attacks on Priti Patel would be dismissed by the left as racism. Is she correct? Well, she's only correct in a theory. She's not correct in reality, because the only person that the left would be probably saying what she says they would be saying would apply to Diane Abbott. But Diane Abbott, like the Saira Khan in the Daily Sunday Mirror, Abbott has no record of working with black people, black campaigners in this country. Diane Abbott has been invented as a political by the racists, the likes of which, of course, are typified by Jeremy Corbyn, who had a personal sexual relationship with her. And he bragged about that relationship when he brought in 2 white people to his flat, where Diane Abbott was almost without her clothes. Because those friends have told the Mail that Jeremy Corbyn was showing off his black girlfriend at the time. So Diane Abbott has not worked as a black campaigner or as a person generally working with black campaigners in this country. She has appeared among black people as a sponsored kind of token by white kind of placemen and placewomen. And her sponsors like Ken Livingston and Jeremy Corbyn. Diane Abbott was employed by the Greater London Council, the GLC, between the years 1984 to 86, I suppose, when the GLC was completely abolished by Margaret Thatcher. And Abbott was given a job as a press office person. She was absolutely useless. In those years, I was daily attending the County Hall, which was the headquarters of the Greater London Council. And as I have said before, my agenda at that time included evidentially, factually, ethically, and morally, and democratically to challenge the lies that Ken Livingston was peddling every single week. So I attended over the kind of years of 1981, May 1981. So to May 1981, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86. So over 5 years of the remaining years of the GLC, 5 years like 60 months. Over 60 months, I attended, with the exception of the weekends and any holidays and closed days, I attended, let's say, 3 or 4 days every single week, every single 5 days. And my agenda, as I said, action agenda included challenging evidentially every lie and lying spin that Ken Livingston was doing. So that would be more intensive work-wise than any kind of so-called 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. kind of office worker would do, or any academic person at any university would do, or any senior kind of advocate in the course bureaucracy would do. And I did all the work myself of researching the lies of Ken Livingston and checking the facts. And I did that solely to universally establish the veracity of what I was saying about Livingston. What I said contemporaneously in those years and what I've been saying since on the facts have been vindicated. But at the time, contemporaneously, there was nobody active in any comparable shape or form or sense to my work in contemporaneously monitoring every day the behavior of Ken Livingston and his cabal at the Greater London Council. And nobody has done that work except me. And the work that I did included taking significant numbers of photographs of the events, meetings, and people gathering, and the general landscape and the general kind of atmosphere on what used to be called the principal floor, that is the ground floor of the County Hall. It was called principal floor when it became began to be called principal floor, I have not checked, but at the time it was called principal floor because all the main offices of the leadership as well as the directors, etc., and education officer, because although it was the GLC, that the county hall was mainly known as the headquarters of, but the same building, the same floor also accommodated the Inner London Education Authority. Now, simultaneously with my political and ethical investigative work, investigating and monitoring and auditing the behavior of the Greater London Council, I was also an active member of at least 3 committees of the Inner London Education Authority. And as I have said before, the most kind of, in terms of numbers of people affected by its behavior, the most kind of influential one was the committee called the Schools Committee or Subcommittee. Because in the 10 Inner London boroughs, there were hundreds of thousands of people affected by the behavior of the policies of the Inner London Education Authority. And the most direct impact came from the behavior and the policies of the Schools Subcommittee of the Inner London Education Authority. So while my work on monitoring and diagnosing and auditing the behavior of Ken lying still Livingston. Now, the lying still was not the kind of description I used at that time. I began using lying still about Ken lying still Livingston only after he became mayor at the expense of London in 2001. Sorry, in the year 2000. And when I noticed that he was lying just in the same style and the manner that he had been lying at the GLC, Greater London Council, which I at the time gave the name of greedier lying conurbation or liar's conurbation. The fact that he was lying, I had cottoned on and I had identified immediately at the start of the kind of reign that Ken lying still Livingston began after he ousted Andrew McIntosh in that coup that he led in May 1981. And the entirety of the principal floor and the kind of parts of the principal floor, that is the kind of common room on the first floor, where there were newspapers for members of the GLC and the ILEA. I covered all these kind of parts of the building, investigating the various gatherings, investigating and observing and photographing where I could, because not everything could be photographed, either for technical reasons or for other reasons like the photography was not allowed. But I managed to take as many photographs as was physically possible of the events. And I am the only one who did that. And my photography kind of covers decades. And most of my pictures of political events that I actually decided to photograph have been world exclusives. And everything I said in the kind of narrative about the events, and the narratives included the examples by photography, the evidence by photography, if you like, and filming. Everything I said in those decades has been vindicated. And everything I said since the scrapping of the GLC in 1985-86 has come true. Now that has impact on people right across the various backgrounds. People of all ethnicities, all kind of orientations, all faiths, no faiths, and nationalities, and the rest of it. It has been always my policy and my principle to look at the whole picture and then diagnose and dissect and separate the various component bits. So, for example, in the diagnosis, the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, what I'm saying today about Saira Khan has not been said by anybody other than me. And Saira Khan is not the first one that I'm applying this diagnostic kind of value to. I'm saying she's mentally intentional stooge, which is the main reason why a platform like the racist and anti-Muslim Sunday Mirror or the Daily Mirror group would give her any platform at all. To only a slightly different kind of degree, the same kind of analysis applies to Aisha Hazarika. Aisha Hazarika is a Scottish Glasgow-born daughter of a, I think, a Homi father, Muslim father from Assam, and a white mother, either Irish or Scottish background. Aisha Hazarika kind of tried to become an MP from a Scottish kind of constituency. But because of our politics, which is right-wing and not very reliable, Hazarika was not successful in doing that, in getting a safe seat as a Labour Party member. So she branched out into Fleet Street and she introduced herself as a former advisor to Ed Miliband and then a former advisor to Hattie Harman and other people, and then as a former Labour Party advisor. So that was her capital, that was her stock. At no point did she kind of introduce herself as an opponent of anything, let alone opponent of racism, far less as an opponent of anti-Muslim hostility in Britain and in the British media. Hazarika has now been given a kind of more regular spot on the London Evening Standard. And Hazarika is increasingly exhibiting signs that she has lost contact with her kind of faith and her parents' kind of origin or whatever, and her identity. Most of the stuff she writes is in denial of all of those. Now the problem with that denial is, then what is she contributing? Just being a member of the population who can be described as a component of diversity is not good enough. It's not her presence on a platform. It's not her getting the money as a part of the staff or the group of writers. It is the content of what she contributes. And the content of what she contributes is not distinguishable from the contents of the main indigenous white counterparts that are in employment and on commission by the London Evening No Standard. And the same analysis applies to Sarah Khan. And the same analysis applies to dozens of others that are visible members of the staff or writers on The Guardian and others. But their contribution doesn't bring in the original kind of component of racism in this country, racism at every stage, injustice in the context, and the role of the empire in the whole series of daily hate preaching that goes on about the people wanting to come here as asylum seekers or as migrants. And the fact that Michael Gove's wife in the Mail on Sunday is kind of hypothesizing about Priti Patel being a Labour cabinet member, Priti Patel being an Asian and a member of the cabinet of a Labour government. She's saying wrongly that her backers would call her critics racists, but that's not the case. For a start, I would never kind of criticize a correct and factual critique of anyone like Priti Patel if the evidence justifies that critique, and the evidence against Priti Patel is so overwhelming that the question doesn't even arise as to her being targeted by any kind of racistly motivated critics. And Sarah Bain is showing her own ignorance because Priti Patel has never been criticized by the left at all for being kind of any particular racial or ethnic origin or background, nor has she been targeted by anyone over those. In fact, the left has left her alone in terms of her ethnicity. They have not talked about her ethnicity. So the left, if she were in the Labour government, would not have focused on the ethnicity. If the left have done that, then I have missed that, and I don't believe that they have done that, or that I have missed that. And the Mail on Sunday is celebrating how Kate Middleton and Wills's kind of marriage saved the monarchy. Now, compare the hostility to Meghan and Harry by the same Mail on Sunday and the rest of Fleet Street. And you can see that they are not concerned in the slightest about the future of the monarchy at all. And they've got a 2-page promotion for the book by a racist member of the Labour Party. Mail Sunday says that the Labour Party is abandoning its traditional roots because of their racism. It is absolutely as brazen as that. It's saying that the Labour Party has to become more racist in order to get back into power. That's what it's saying. The Mail on Sunday is saying the Labour Party needs to be more racist. And there is a confession in the headline. Same-sex fertility chief saying legalizing gay marriage has caused a surge in lesbian breakups. And they're talking about the Pakistani heart surgeon who is 62 years old now, Hasnat Khan. And they're saying that Diana and he had a 2-year fling which ended in the summer of 1997. In terms of time, it suggests it is not long before she was killed. Now, this is the only person that Fleet Street has not treated with the racist hostility and contempt that they have reserved for Al-Fayed and his son. Whereas they have treated Al-Fayed and his son, Dodi, with contempt. They have always treated Hasnat Khan as the natural boyfriend that Diana kind of should have had. Now, here is a piece on the business and money on the Boris graph saying the pandemic borrowing spree on track to hit 500 billion pounds. Now, what borrowing are they referring to? They're referring to the government borrowing almost 500 billion pounds this year as it scrambles to cover costs of the pandemic. The official fiscal watchdog is expected to confirm this week amid warnings that the national debt will keep rising for at least another 10 years. And we shall be discussing the economics of corruption in due course. the Sunday Boris graph has got a piece by Michael Wolff about Trump's next move and a piece about the Crown, her private secretary on the Crown's truth decay. Apparently, Margaret Thatcher's private secretary is describing the Crown as truth decay, which means that they're saying that it's all full of lies. Now, that means that the Crown would be watched by more people. And they're also claiming that Priti Patel has shaken up antiquated work practices at the Home Office. That is absolute pack of lies. And they said that the main piece is about the planned ending of the lockdown next week. But they're saying it will be followed by stricter tiers of lockdown aversions. And they've got Ted Hughes has been criticized by the British Library over his links with slave trade. Let's see what's saying. Former poet laureate is tarred with connection due to ancestors' activities 300 years previously. The British Library has added the poet Ted Hughes to dossier on links to slavery and colonialism based on the actions of an ancestor more than 300 years before his birth. Now they are mocking the kind of behavior or conduct of the British Library against, belated, but at least in symbolic terms, against the slavery trade. Despite his humble origins, curators from the library's printed heritage collections team have identified Hughes as part of research to find evidence of connections to slavery, profits from slavery, or from colonialism among the former owners of items. The offending relative was Nicholas Ferrar, born in 1592, whose family was deeply involved with the London Virginia Company, set up to establish colonies in North America, the research says. But his descendant Hughes was not born until 1930 in the West Yorkshire village of, what is the name of the village? Mytholmroyd or Mytholmroyd. Mytholmroyd. His family later moved to Maxborough, a town in South Yorkshire, where his father ran a tobacco shop. He ended up at Cambridge on a scholarship. So the British Library has also identified Lord Byron, Oscar Wilde, and George Orwell in their research, all through far removed relatives. So the piece is completely in denial. As part of a bid to become an actively anti-racist organization in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. That is what they're blaming for all this. The tenuous starring of Hughes has drawn scorn from experts. Of course it would. It's ridiculous to tar Hughes with a slave trade connection, and it's not a helpful way to think about writers. The poet's biographer, Sir Jonathan Bate, told the Sunday Telegraph, "Why on earth would you judge the quality of an artist's work on the basis of distant ancestors. Sir Jonathan added that Farrar was best known as a priest and a scholar who funded the religious community Little Gidding made famous by Hughes's idol T.S. Eliot. Hughes, who died in 1998, became famous as a poet examining the brutality of the natural world and for his marriage to American writer Sylvia Plath. Romantic poet Lord Byron has been entered on the list thanks to his great-grandfather being a merchant who owned an estate in Grenada and his uncle by marriage who owned a plantation in St. Kitts. Emily Patterson Morgan of the Byron Society said, "It's vital to read authors by the standards and values of their time." She added that while some research is valuable, it can lead to the forced politicization of literature and the mapping out of more tenuous connections can be reductive. Connections logged following British Library research also include the family of anti-imperialist writer Orwell. Eric Blair. Orwell was born in India to sub-deputy opium agent in the Bengal government. His great-grandfather had been a wealthy slave owner in Jamaica, but the Orwell Society has said that the money was long gone before the author was born. Irish aesthete Wilde, born long after abolition, has been logged for his uncle's interest in the slave trade. The research notes that there is no evidence the author inherited any of the wealth generated. The publication of the list on the British Library's website is accompanied with an explanation of the research. It reads, "Some items now at the British Library, previously owned by particular named figures cited on these pages, are associated with wealth obtained from the enslaved people or through colonial violence." So, let's put it simply. There is nothing in Britain, including the purest of the pure, let's say, in this context, the British Library is free from contamination by slavery, by racism, by empire, by imperialism. That is the case, then how is it that the same copy of the Sunday Bodygraph is totally silent on what is going on currently by racists and racism and racist agenda? This is the diagnostic question we put on the basis of this whole thing that we have just read in full. And we talk about Saira Khan, talk about Aisha Hazarika, and there is this something else completely. And it says, former spy chief to earn up to £25,000 for after dinner talks. Now, if the former chief earns £25,000 for one speech, then given that the quality of the spying, the quality added by the spying to the quality of life and democracy is very tenuous indeed, this would be a hugely exaggerated amount of money to pay him. In comparison with him, what about our campaign and our work, which is contributing? Every single word is a positive value added to the cause of understanding, scholarship, and the search for truth. So if Andrew Parker, who was the former head of MI5, is paid £25,000 for after dinner talk. Then each edition of this program is worth at least twice that much or more. But let's settle for the double amount, that is £50,000. Multiply that over the period and equate the number of hours speaking and sharing knowledge and evidence and analysis with other people over a long time. It would be hundreds of millions or billions of pounds. So the piece by Robert Haque and Robert Mendick says the former head of the MI5 has been cleared to embark on a new career as an after-dinner speaker, earning up to £25,000 a speech. Less than 6 months after stepping down as Britain's spy chief. So, £25,000 for a speech after dinner speech. And there is more propaganda for Williams and Kate Middleton. And there is a campaign in Dorset against road closure by the local council. Remember what happened in Brick Lane. And there is a piece in the name of Rupa Haque, Labour MP for Ealing Central and Acton. We're saying that the sound of the suburbs is now one of revolt. She's talking about the lockdown. And she has been given a space in the Boris graph. And there is a piece about the vaccine. There are two pieces about the vaccine and the virus. And there is an admission that the addiction services fail middle-class problem drinkers. And another one says that opinion poll reveals 1 in 4 persons will break rules to see family at Christmas. And another one saying that the backbench MPs, Tory MPs, are up in arms against stricter tier rules. And there is a very serious piece about Ethiopia. Now, this is not being run in any other paper, so this is something that is very significant. It's written by somebody called Will Brown, and it's headed Dispatch. And it says Ethiopia may be on the edge of genocide. And it says refugees fleeing civil war in their thousands to neighboring Sudan have horrific tales of atrocities. Now, this is the picture they're running with this item, the Dispatch, of women and children. We have not read the caption, but it is a picture that must have been taken outside of Ethiopia in Sudan. There is no caption directly to the photograph. But Ethiopia is situated where? To the south. Yes, southwest of Yemen. and to the south of Eritrea. And the picture captioned, the caption is far removed from the picture, and it says, pictured are women and children at a refugee camp. Clearly, they are not in Ethiopia itself, they have been pictured outside of Ethiopia. So, what they're saying is that the women were midway through the labor when the hospital, the women were midway through their labor when the hospital director came in and told Mihret, Glahif, she had to run for her life. It didn't matter that her patients were giving birth. The staff had to leave immediately. The civil war had arrived and it was knocking on the door. Now, we shall not be reading the whole piece yet. But the question is, why is Ethiopia in that situation? Has the West played any part? And this mentally kind of infantile Madeleine Grant is saying that Margaret Thatcher was the pro-liberty prime minister and that Britain hasn't had a pro-liberty prime minister since Thatcher. That headline sounds like Thatcher was 1,000 years ago. Thatcher was only prime minister 4 prime ministers ago. So it's not a long time, to count. And there is a piece in the Boris graph where it's saying that Rishi Sunak, the finance minister, should make cuts, and there is a list of the cuts that he should make. And Johnson and the Archbishop are shown in the cartoon, kind of traveling in the Christmas party hamper. And this very right-wing racist woman who has been given a platform in the Daily Telegraph for decades, Janet Daly, who is against the lockdown as well, of course. And the kind of intro to her piece is terrifying people, then locking them up has profound political and social implications. Now, Janet Daly is one of the liars in Fleet Street or through Fleet Street that have been contaminating the kind of atmosphere of public debate and discourse in this country for decades. And she is one of the Americans that has been allowed the platform to fuel the hatred of Muslims. And the Daily Boris graph has been a prime platform for such anti-Muslim, racists and haters to fume from. And General Daly is not critical of Johnson, although the headline is dressed up as critical. She makes it very clear she is not criticizing the policy because the policy will have to be judged by history afterwards. And there is a propaganda piece for the American kind of mixed race person, Sarah Cooper, who is being promoted endlessly in the USA now by the Democratic cabal, and she is definitely destined for kind of a platform during the Biden kind of regime. And the Observer is saying Johnson acted illegally over jobs for top anti-COVID staff. And this is by Toby Helm and Michael Savage. Legal action targets choice of Dido Harding. Key appointments avoided fairness rules. Now, this is the first time in a very long time when constitutional law has been invoked in a matter that should have been kind of addressed according to the constitutional law rules over the last 10 months. And I don't kind of leave out of the list the two Supreme Court challenges about Brexit, but they were not constitutional law actions in my view. This one looks like more realistically like a constitutional law action. Boris Johnson and his health secretary, Matt Hancock, acted unlawfully when appointing three key figures, including the head of NHS Test and Trace, Dido Harding, to posts in the fight against COVID-19, according to legal challenge submitted by campaigners to the High Court. The Observer has seen details of the documents from those pursuing the case and initial responses from the government lawyers relating to the call for a judicial review into the appointment of Baroness Harding, who is a Tory peer, and into those of Kate Bingham to the post of head of the UK's vaccine task force and Mike Cooper to the role of director of testing at NHS Test and Trace. And it is Jolyon Mom QC who is doing it. So that is it. It's Jolyon Mom. And there is another piece in the Observer where it says officials blocked access to Patel's inquiry witness, which means that the inquiry was a sham. It was a complete, absolutely sham, and it was undermined by Boris Johnson blocking evidence gathering from witnesses. Now, this is something that should be kind of included in the daily news coverage by the mainstream, but there is no daily news coverage of these things happening. And the fact that there is this judicial review by Jolyon Mom, quote, QC, is not acceptable either, because this should have been immediately challenged. The legality or the alleged illegality of Boris Johnson's behavior in all those appointments and contracts giving should have been challenged immediately by filing applications in the High Court. Whether or not this succeeds is not the main thing. The fact that there has been a challenge according to the constitutional law. The point that I made to Robin Wales of Newham when he was in post as the mayor of Newham, elected mayor of Newham, on the live program, short program, it lasted about half an hour, but it was absolutely vital. The issues that I raised there and the evidence of Wales failing to answer a single one of my questions on the 14th of March 2018, days before he was deselected or replaced by the Newham Labour Party as a candidate for mayor at the election that took place in May 2018. And Johnson is said to be under pressure over winter plans on the virus as scientists back tight rules for Christmas. And there is a piece about Sadiq Khan, who is the incumbent mayor in the name of London, which is given the political editor Toby Helm as the byline writer. Existential threat to central London as commuters embrace suburbs, warned Sadiq Khan. Mayor reveals struggles with mental health in lockdown, missing Sunday football, and his plans for next year. It's a kind of profile piece for Sadiq Khan politically. And there are and the Church of England's Archbishop Justin Welby has told Johnson that he should not cut overseas aid. Now that is predictable, and that is not as innocent as it may sound. It's part of the plan B of the colonialist kind of foreign policy, so-called foreign policy. Like there is a kind of doorway being opened for Johnson to stage the U-turn. And there is a piece by the same writer in the Observer. And the new Equalities Commissioner attacked modern feminism and Me Too movement. Now here is a piece by Michael Savage, the policy editor, who is saying that infighting in the Labour Party, Labour infighting inquiry damages Starmer's position. Now, Starmer is not going to solve the problem of this country. Why? Because Starmer is a Tory. So, in comparison with Johnson, Starmer may come across as being kind of likely, preferable as a person. That it appears. But when it comes to policy, Starmer is as bad as the Johnson cabal. And this Barbara Allen is commenting on the Agatha Christie libel case, that is Rebecca Vardy versus Colin Rooney. Now, going through the headlines on the Observer, it is quite clear that there is no evidence. There is no evidence-based journalism in the Observer. It's gossip and propaganda absolutely full of trash. This is the Observer, the Sunday version of the Guardian. And there is a piece about the Facebook getting involved in neo-Nazi propaganda network. Facebook condemned for hosting neo-Nazi network with UK links. Now, Facebook is, of course, guilty of that and more.